a quiet morning in a suburban neighborhood, a reserved black gardener, often ignored by the neighbors, suddenly hears a piercing scream. An elderly woman across the street has collapsed, attacked by bees and going into anaphylactic shock. No one runs to help except him. He does everything he can to save her, but when the police arrive, he's met with guns drawn, simply because of his skin color, until she wakes up, speaks the truth, and the entire street is forced to see him differently. It was a soft spring morning in Willowcrest, a tidy suburban neighborhood nestled on the eastern edge of Sacramento, California. The sun was warm but not harsh, painting long golden strokes across driveways and well-trimmed hedges. Bougainvillea draped lazily over garden walls, bees buzzed in their lazy circuits, and the faint smell of lavender drifted from someone's front yard. Sprinklers clicked on in rhythmic unison down the street, like a suburban symphony no one conducted. Kids were already off to school, dogs barked behind fences, and the world, at least for the moment, felt perfectly undisturbed. This neighborhood wasn't fancy enough to make headlines, but it took pride in its order. People waved from driveways but didn't stop for small talk. Lawns were mowed, trash bins wheeled in promptly, and anything or anyone that disrupted that rhythm was silently filed away as not from around here. Marcus Reed knew this unspoken rule by heart. At 28, Marcus had already learned how to make himself smaller, quieter, less visible in places like this. 6 feet tall, broad shoulders from years of hauling mulch and pushing mowers, he moved like someone who'd been taught to never take up more space than necessary. His skin, deep brown and sun-warmed, was the kind that made some folks instinctively lock their car doors. His eyes were a quiet storm, dark, steady, but tired in a way no one ever asked about. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Marcus pushed his weathered pickup into the edge of the cul-de-sac, parked beside the white curb in front of number 114, Mr. and Mrs. Kessler's place, and went about his business. He'd worked that contract for almost 3 years, never missed a day. Still, some neighbors, mostly older white folks, avoided eye contact. A few crossed the street when walking their dogs. One man, Mr. Holloway from 112, once asked him, twice, if he was lost before recognizing the rake in Marcus's hand. Marcus had learned not to respond. He wore earbuds that weren't plugged into anything, just to avoid the awkwardness of small talk that wasn't really small talk, just veiled suspicion. He kept his head down, his work tight, and his thoughts his own. That morning, he was trimming hedges along the edge of the Kessler yard, the buzz of the electric trimmer blending into the neighborhood soundtrack. Across the street, Mrs. Edith Langley, a widow in her 70s, was tending to her front garden as she did every Monday, carefully pinching off dead blossoms and humming softly to herself. Her wide-brimmed straw hat shaded her face, and a little wooden cart filled with garden tools sat beside her walkway. Her house was painted a cheerful pale blue, with hanging flower baskets and a welcome mat that read, "Bloom where you're planted." Marcus had never spoken to her. Once, maybe twice, he caught her glancing at him through her front window. Not with hostility, more like quiet curiosity. Still, she'd never waved. To most of the neighborhood, Marcus was just the gardener. Not Marcus, not Reed, just the service guy. Someone who didn't belong at the homeowner association meetings or in the Christmas potlucks. He was the kind of person they appreciated having around when the weeds grew wild, but were uneasy about if he lingered too long near their front doors. More than once, a police cruiser had slowed down when Marcus was working alone. No one ever said anything. No one had to. But Marcus wasn't here for their comfort. He was here to work, to make money, to finish a day without incident. He moved with a rhythm he'd taught himself. Hedge, sweep, edge, next yard. Order, routine, silence. That's what kept him safe. Still, something about this morning felt alert, a little more alive than usual. A breeze kept lifting his cap. The birds seemed louder. He caught himself watching the older woman across the street longer than usual, watching how gently she handled her flowers, how her hands trembled just slightly with age but not weakness. Then the quiet shattered. It was a sound so sharp, so raw, it sliced through the buzz of the trimmer and stopped Marcus cold. A scream, not a shout or a yell, but a pure primal scream, followed by a loud clattering noise. He turned his head instantly. Across the street, Mrs. Langley had collapsed forward, half buried in the azalea bushes. Her straw hat had flown off, her arms flailed once, then went still, and just above her, hovering like a dark, shifting cloud, was a swarm of bees. Marcus dropped the trimmer before his brain had time to catch up. The metal clattered onto the driveway as he tore across the street, instincts overriding logic. No one else moved. Cars passed by slowly. A jogger on the corner paused with earbuds still in, watching. But no one ran. Only Marcus, and as his boots hit the warm concrete of her driveway, only one thought shot through his mind. Please don't let me be too late. He didn't remember crossing the street. One moment Marcus was dropping his hedge trimmer, the next he was vaulting over Mrs. Langley's low flower-bed fence, Niece brushing against the brick edge as his boots skidded on loose soil. The air was vibrating now, not just with the panicked flutter of wings, but with something more primal, more dangerous. A surge of adrenaline slammed through his chest, drowning out everything except the pounding in his ears and the high-pitched whine of the bees. Mrs. Langley was on the ground, her body twisted awkwardly on the lawn, half curled against the bushes like she'd collapsed mid-mashmere. Her face was blotched red, her skin swelling at an alarming rate, especially around the neck and mouth. Her straw hat lay a few feet away, upside down, with one of her garden gloves still inside it. Her small gardening cart had overturned, and tiny metal tools were scattered in the grass. But it was the bees that froze Marcus for a split second, dozens of them, maybe more, swarming near her head, crawling over her arms, caught in the folds of her shirt like some furious, buzzing shroud. He yanked off his flannel work shirt without thinking, baring his sweat-streaked T-shirt underneath, and began swinging it like a lasso, batting at the air. He stepped over her body carefully, trying to shield her face with his own frame as he waved the shirt with wide, deliberate sweeps. The bees stung him. On the arms, the neck, one near his ear, but he didn't flinch. Pain was irrelevant. What mattered was that she was barely breathing. Her chest rose in small, desperate jerks, and her lips had already started to turn a faint shade of blue. "Ma'am?" he called out, his voice low but urgent, unsure if she could even hear him. "Hey, it's Marcus. You're going to be okay. Just hang on, all right?" There was no response, just that terrible wheezing noise, as if her lungs were filling with wet cotton. Marcus glanced toward her front door, which stood slightly ajar. She must have come out only moments earlier. No one had followed, no family, no neighbor, no curious bystander running to help. The street was watching in suspended judgment, behind blinds, through kitchen windows, from porches with mugs of coffee halfway to lips. One woman across the street held up a phone, filming. Marcus didn't waste another second. He bent low, looped one arm under her shoulders and another under her knees, and lifted her carefully but urgently. She was lighter than expected, frail, bones sharp against his forearm. He pushed forward to the shaded entryway, kicking the screen door fully open with his foot and stepping inside, setting her gently on the cool tile of the front hallway. The air inside was a relief, quiet and still, the buzz of bees muffled behind the door as it slammed shut behind him. But the quiet only emphasized how wrong everything was. Mrs. Langley was going into anaphylactic shock. He'd seen it once before, years ago, when a kid at his middle school got stung during gym class. Her throat was closing, her breath shallow and strained, and her eyes rolled weakly, unfocused. He dropped to his knees beside her and scanned the hall. Keys on a hook, mail on a side table, a framed photo of a man in a Navy uniform. No medical alert tag, nothing obvious. Then he saw it, on the far wall just beyond the entryway. A small wooden box mounted beside the coat rack, Red Cross sticker on the front. First aid. Marcus crawled over, yanked it open, and exhaled sharply when he saw it. A slim injector pen nestled between bandages and antiseptic wipes. "Thank God," he whispered, grabbing the EpiPen and spinning back toward her. He remembered the instructions from years ago, blue to the sky, orange to the thigh. He pulled off the cap, pressed the tip firmly into the outside of her leg, and counted aloud. 1, 2, 3. The click was solid, mechanical. He held it in place, praying silently that it would work, that her throat would open, that she'd breathe. As he withdrew the pen, her body twitched. Her lips parted slightly. Then another wheeze, but this one stronger, sharper. A sound clawing back toward life. Okay, you're doing good," he said softly. Brushing a damp strand of hair, her skin was clammy, and the swelling hadn't subsided yet, but something in her expression changed, an almost imperceptible shift from total panic to faint awareness. He pulled his phone from his pocket, fingers slick with sweat, and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I've got a woman, elderly, multiple bee stings, she's going into anaphylaxis. I gave her an EpiPen, but she still needs help, fast. Address? He rattled it off, glancing at the number on the front door. Is she breathing? Barely, but yeah. She's conscious, swollen, weak pulse. We're dispatching an ambulance now. Stay on the line. He stayed with her on the floor, murmuring calming things he wasn't sure she could hear. His own breathing was ragged now, his adrenaline dropping fast. He was vaguely aware of the stings on his own arms beginning to throb, but he didn't care. He just needed her to stay awake. She blinked slowly, her lips moving, and he leaned closer, barely catching the whisper. You saved me. His throat tightened. No, ma'am, you're the strong one. Through the narrow front window, he saw the spinning red lights in the distance begin to bloom. Sirens screamed down the otherwise quiet street, growing louder with every passing second. Behind them, neighbors stepped outside, phones in hand, expressions mixed, some concerned, others merely curious, as though this were another story to be consumed from the curb. But Marcus wasn't thinking about them. He wasn't thinking about the cell phones or the stairs or the fact that his skin made him a suspect before a witness. He just held Mrs. Langley's hand, firm but careful, and waited for the sound of boots and voices and stretchers and noise. Because for now, in this moment, all that mattered was that she was still alive. The wail of the sirens fractured the stillness like glass cracking under pressure. As they screeched closer, Marcus instinctively stood up, backing away a few steps to give the paramedics space. His hands were still trembling, coated with sweat and traces of dirt from the garden, and he could feel the sting swelling on his neck where one of the bees had gotten him. But the pain was distant now, like background noise. All that existed was the old woman on the tile floor, breathing in shallow pulls, her fingers still faintly twitching. When the paramedics burst through the door, they moved with practiced urgency. Two knelt by Mrs. Langley immediately, while another, a stocky white man in a navy blue jacket, turned toward Marcus. His eyes flicked to the woman on the floor, then back to Marcus's dark skin, his muscular build, his dusty jeans and sweat-stained shirt. "You live here?" the man asked sharply. Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but hesitated. In a heartbeat, he could feel the energy shift. It was subtle but undeniable. The man's stance stiffened, one hand slowly edging toward his radio. A second responder stepped inside, followed by two officers in full uniform. One of them, the taller one, mid-40s, face tight with suspicion, let his hand rest on his holstered gun. "I don't," Marcus said calmly, raising both hands slightly, palms out. "I work next door. I saw her collapse in the yard. B-attack. She has a severe allergy. I found her EpiPen inside and gave her the shot. Then I called 911. 11. The officer's eyes narrowed. He looked over Marcus's shoulder at the overturned flower cart still visible outside, then down at Mrs. Langley, who was now semi-conscious, her throat still swollen, a nasal cannula delivering oxygen. "Step outside for me," the officer said, not as a request. His tone was firm, measured, the kind used when assuming guilt first and asking questions second. Marcus didn't argue. He turned slowly, carefully, and walked out the door with both hands visible. As he stepped onto the porch, he saw the crowd that had quietly gathered. Neighbors standing behind hedges, in driveways, on porches, murmuring, watching. A few held phones angled in his direction, the red record light unmistakable. No one spoke up. No one said, "That man just saved her life." No one said anything. He stood on the front lawn with his hand still slightly raised, trying not to appear threatening, trying to keep his breathing steady. One of the officers followed him outside while the others remained inside, their radios crackling. The air was thick now, not with bees but with something colder, more familiar. That same unspoken judgment he'd felt 1,000 times in 1,000 ways, from store clerks who followed him down aisles to women clutching purses tighter in elevators. A younger cop joined them. She looked uncertain, flipping through a small notepad. "Sir, what's your name?" "Marcus Reed." "Spell it." He did. She scribbled it down. "And you say you work next door?" "I've done landscaping here for 3 years. Kessler's Yard, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays." "Did anyone else see what happened?" Marcus glanced around. People were still watching. A few looked away when he met their eyes. Mr. Holloway stood with arms crossed in his driveway, expression unreadable. A woman with curlers in her hair held her phone low at her side but didn't stop recording. No one stepped forward. "I don't know," Marcus said finally. "I didn't see anyone else outside when she collapsed." The paramedics wheeled Mrs. Langley out moments later, now secured on a stretcher, an IV in her arm, her face still puffy but no longer blue. As they moved down the walkway, she stirred, her voice gravelly, barely audible, but her lips moved with intention. One of the EMTs leaned closer. She spoke again, this time louder. "Him. He helped me. That man saved me." The EMT looked over at Marcus. "You, Marcus?" He nodded. The man raised an eyebrow and nodded back with a grunt of respect. "Good job, man. You acted fast. You might have saved her life." Marcus managed a faint nod, but before he could respond, the older officer beside him gave a short, curt sigh, then muttered, "Well, that's one version." Marcus turned to him, his jaw tensing. "Excuse me?" The officer shrugged, glancing at the gathered neighbors. "Look, not saying you did anything wrong, just, you understand how this looks, right? Woman down, you inside her house, no witnesses backing your story." Marcus stared at him. "So doing the right thing is suspicious now?" The officer didn't answer. At that moment, something shifted in Marcus. Not anger, not yet, but the deep, familiar ache of exhaustion, the kind that comes from being questioned every time you show up, every time you try, every time you're not invisible anymore. He let out a long breath and looked up at the sun, still bright, still warm, completely indifferent. One of the paramedics approached. "She's stable for now. You did the right thing." Another voice joined them, an older woman in a hospital scrubs top, the neighbor from the corner house. She had walked over quietly and now stood between Marcus and the officers. "I saw him run over when she screamed," she said. "Didn't even hesitate, went straight in. I watched from my kitchen window. Whole thing took maybe 2 minutes." The officer paused. "You're sure?" She looked him straight in the eyes. "Sure as hell, more sure than the people standing around filming and doing nothing." The silence after that was thick and awkward. Marcus let his hands drop to his sides. The officers exchanged a glance, then gave a half-hearted thank you and began to back off. One tapped something into a tablet, the other walked toward the patrol car without another word. The neighbor in scrubs gave Marcus a small nod before returning to her porch. It wasn't much, but it was something. As the ambulance pulled away, red lights flashing down the sunlit street, Marcus remained where he was, standing, among roses, footprints in the lawn, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The moment passed. The adrenaline faded, and what remained was something heavier than exhaustion. Not regret, not fear, just a familiar wariness. Not because of what had happened, but because of how predictably everything else had followed. He walked back to the Kessler's Yard in silence, picked up his dropped trimmer and restarted it. The hum of the blades returned, blending back into the suburban white noise. But for Marcus, the morning wasn't quiet anymore. It never would be. The days that followed drifted by in the kind of rhythm Marcus knew too well. Quiet, unremarkable, deliberately routine. He returned to his regular schedule like nothing had happened, pulling weeds, trimming hedges, blowing leaves into neat piles no one seemed to notice. The street felt the same on the surface. But beneath that placid suburban stillness was a tension he couldn't quite name. Not outright hostility, no one had said anything to him. Yet there were pauses where there hadn't been before. Conversation stopped when he passed, cars took just a second longer to lock. Even the joggers seemed to switch sides of the street more often. Still, Marcus didn't change. He woke early, parked in the same spot, went about his work with that same quiet efficiency that had kept him invisible for most of his life. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He had learned long ago that being right didn't always mean being safe, and being brave didn't always earn you trust. But the bee stings were healing, and the sun still rose. It wasn't until the following Wednesday, nearly a full week later, that the stillness broke. The Kesslers weren't home, which meant Marcus had the whole front yard to himself. The late morning sun cast soft shadows on the sidewalk, and a pair of mourning doves cooed from somewhere up in the oak tree. It was peaceful, familiar, until the small sound of a cane tapping against concrete pulled his attention to the other side of the street. He looked up from the flower bed he was edging and saw her, Mrs. Langley. She was moving slowly, her left hand gripping a metal cane, the other wrapped loosely around a paperback book. Her movements were cautious but deliberate. Her wide-brimmed hat was back on her head, tilted just enough to reveal a pair of alert eyes. Her face was still puffy in places, healing, her color not fully returned. But she was walking. Marcus straightened, not sure what to do. He didn't wave, he didn't speak. Part of him wondered if she even remembered him clearly, if the trauma had blurred the details or left her unsure. But she kept walking, right up to the edge of his work zone, stopping just short of the patch of lavender he'd replanted last season. She looked at the flowers, then at him. Her voice was quiet but firm. "You saved my life." Marcus blinked, unsure how to respond. He nodded once. "I did what I could." "No," she said, tapping the cane once against the ground. "You did what no one else did. You ran toward me." Everyone else stood still. Her words settled between them like dust floating in sunlight. There was no audience, no phones, no fanfare. Just two people, a garden, and the memory of what had happened. "I remember everything," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "I remember your face above mine. I remember the way you spoke. I remember the fear, and then the relief." Marcus shifted his weight. "I wasn't sure you'd even—" He trailed off. "I would have died," she finished for him. "If you hadn't known what to do, I wouldn't be standing here." He looked down, hands in his pockets, not used to gratitude that sounded like truth. She stepped closer, placing the paperback on the top rail of the fence. "I don't know if anyone said it properly yet, so let me." Her voice softened. "Thank you." A breeze moved between them, ruffling the edges of the flower beds. The smell of cut grass mixed with the faint perfume of roses. Marcus finally looked her in the eyes. "You're welcome," he said, quiet but certain. From across the street, someone peeked out from behind a curtain. Another neighbor on a porch paused mid-sip of her coffee, but this time it didn't matter. Mrs. Langley wasn't finished. "I told them at the hospital, told the EMTs, the nurses, my niece, everyone who came to visit. I said, it wasn't luck, it was Marcus." She smiled, a faint curve of the lips. "They didn't know who that was at first, so I made sure they did." He blinked, not quite ready for what that meant. "And I told them I want you to keep coming here," she added, "not just to do the yard. I want you to come have tea one day, if you feel like it." He let out a soft breath of laughter, surprised by how much emotion was wrapped in such a simple offer. "I'll think about it," he said. She gave a satisfied nod and turned slowly, walking back across the street, the cane tapping softly on the pavement. Marcus watched her until she reached her porch, took one step at a time, and disappeared behind her front door. Later that afternoon, after finishing his work, Marcus noticed something odd. A group of teenagers had gathered at the corner, whispering and pointing toward his truck. He walked over cautiously and saw what they were staring at. A video. It was playing on someone's phone, grainy vertical footage, clearly shot from a window across the street. In it, Marcus was seen running toward Mrs. Langley, swatting bees, lifting her, disappearing into the house. A voice in the background whispered, "That's the guy who saved her." He didn't stay to watch the rest. But it was enough to know the story was spreading. Not through official channels, not through dramatic news coverage, just word of mouth, neighbor to neighbor, frame by frame. Quiet truths, like seeds planted in silence. By Friday, someone had posted a photo of Marcus on the community bulletin board outside the neighborhood cafe. A candid shot of him pushing a mower, sun behind his shoulders, captioned simply, "Thank you, Marcus." He didn't ask who put it there. He didn't take it down. He just kept showing up. The people who used to look past him now nodded as he passed. Not all of them, not always, but some. And that was enough for now, because even in a place like Willow Crest, where silence often spoke louder than kindness, something had shifted. Not loud, not sudden, but real. It started with a flyer, a simple piece of paper taped to the mailbox at the end of the block, the kind most people ignored, but this one stood out, not because of its design, which was plain, but because of what it said: Community Thanks and Garden Dedication, Saturday, 4 p.m. All are welcome. No one signed it, but everyone knew. When Marcus pulled up that Saturday, the usual rhythm of his day was broken by the sight of folding chairs, arranged in a semicircle around a small patch of grass at the end of the cul-de-sac. Someone had trimmed the bushes. There were paper lanterns hanging from the trees. A few tables with lemonade, cookies, and little note cards sat beneath a blue canopy. It was quiet, but people were there. Dozens of them. Neighbors who'd never said a word. Teenagers who'd watched him from across the street. Mrs. Langley was there too, seated in the front row with a cane resting across her lap and her chin lifted like a general surveying her troops. Marcus didn't know where to stand at first. He thought about leaving, but then someone waved him forward. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9, stepped out from behind her father and handed him a folded card. On it was a crayon drawing of a man with brown skin and a green lawnmower, surrounded by bees with big eyes and goofy wings. Above it, written in looping, uneven handwriting, "You are my hero." Before he could say anything, Mrs. Langley stood up slowly, the quiet murmurs fading into stillness. She didn't have a microphone, didn't need one. Her voice was steady. "I asked for this gathering," she began, "not because Marcus asked for attention. He didn't. Not because he expected a reward. He wouldn't take one. But because sometimes silence is the cruelest kind of injustice, and gratitude deserves more than a whispered thank you." She turned toward him, her eyes wet but steady. "He saved my life, and I will spend the rest of mine making sure people don't forget it." There was no applause, not at first, just a long, silent swell of emotion, raw, communal, humbling. Then the clapping began. Deeper slow at first, then rising as more hands joined in. Not performative, not forced. Real. Someone stepped forward and unveiled a small wooden sign at the edge of the garden. Carved into it were 5 simple words: Marcus Garden. In quiet honor. Marcus stood still, unsure what to do with the feeling crawling up his chest. Not embarrassment, not pride exactly, something older than both. Recognition. A name, placed not on a screen or whispered behind hands, but carved into wood where it would stay. Later, as the chairs emptied and the sun softened into the gold of late afternoon, Marcus stayed behind to help pack up. Mrs. Langley approached him, her steps slow but sure. "You'll come back next week?" she asked. He smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." And when she turned to go, Marcus lingered for a moment, staring at the garden now bearing his name. He didn't need the sign. He didn't need the applause. But something had changed, not in him but around him. The street saw him now, not as a shadow, not as a threat, as a man. As someone who showed up. Someone who ran in when no one else moved. No cape, no speech, just hands, instinct, and heart. And sometimes that was more than enough. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.